Just tell us which were the 5 leading brands. Why were they the leading brands? How did the judges make their choice?
Well, I think it's no surprise to anyone that the leading brand overall was Coca-Cola. But thereafter, we had very strong contenders with Vodacom and particularly KFC. Coca-Cola got the highest score overall. Vodacom came second when people asked, what is your favorite brand overall? But in terms of the scoring systems, KFC was a very close second to Coca-Cola. So those were very much the top 3 contenders. And we had other brands which were perhaps not unexpected, like Nokia coming through very strongly for cell phones as well.
Okay, now there was a lot of public input solicited and also some views from about 400 business leaders. With this composition of Coca-Cola, KFC, Vodacom, Nokia, what does that say about the values of the South African consumer today?
I think people look at the brands that they use every day, the brands that they trust, the brands that help them with their everyday lives, the brands that don't let them down. And I think that all of the 4 brands I've mentioned, in fact, exemplify those values. These are brands that are trusted. The methodology we used this year was a bit different from previous years. You know, the Sunday Times Top Brands has been going for 10 years. And this year we were the new incumbents in terms of doing the research, and we took this chance to change the methodology. And one of the big changes we made was not just to look at the size of a brand, but also how much people rated it above its competitors. And we called this kind of thing brand sparkle, brand love. And that tells us that these are the brands that are trusted.
Okay, now Coca-Cola is very much a global brand, one of the foremost global brands. I'd have to say KFC, although very much an international company, is a very localized brand because of the way South Africans relate to fast food. What does that tell us by way of the relevance of these brands, their global reach and equity?
Well, I think that the global brands do have a very big role to play here, but most of the brands we've been talking about are brands that have been here for quite a while. And brands like Vodacom and KFC, I mean, KFC is an international brand, but I think it has a huge local flavor. Vodacom is very much a local brand. I mean, people sing its ad songs at rugby matches. So I think it's made its own very much strong local presence. It's made itself part of everyday life.
The business element, Francois, is that in the middle of a recession and when company margins are lower, the first budget to be slashed is usually the marketing and advertising budget. And somebody would argue the minute you do that, it affects your brand equity because you're not visible. But then another argument is if you're Coca-Cola, you've already got brand equity. Yours is just to maintain. So you don't need to be spending a lot of money. What do you make of that?
I think that's the biggest mistake many, especially smaller and medium companies, do make. If you read through the annual reports of the high-end luxury brands, I'm talking about the Richmonds, the LVMHs, those kind of groups, the first thing that's visible if you pick up a Time magazine is that they are there, they're in your face. If I picked up a watch magazine in New York last week, and they were talking about the most recognizable watches and ad spend, and Rolex top of the pops, with spending more than $50 million last week. So there's a very strong correlation between ad spend and the results you get from that.
You agree with that?
I think that's very true. In a recession, you've got a chance to make up brand share by being very visible. And we see that particularly with KFC, who have been very much visible in the last few weeks, months even. And even in the banking sector, FNB, which won the retail banking sector, their ad spend is up compared with their competitors. And I think it shows.
Right. Okay, you talked to us about FNB, for instance, and you mentioned Rolex. And the one thing that comes to my mind is sponsorship of major tournaments. Rolex will sponsor something like Wimbledon. And again, that is a part of day-to-day life, is that there's that brand visibility as well as the aspiration. FNB is a premier sponsor of the 2010 Soccer World Cup tournament. And again, they're going to be able to leverage the brand. The question about something like a 2010 coming through is the exclusivity rights at FIFA, where you've got to spend in excess of 300 million rands in order just to be able to be associated with the tournament. And a lot of blue chip South African companies don't want to have to do that.
Yeah, I think sponsorship is a thing that one has to be very carefully planned. The conventional wisdom is that for every rand you spend on sponsorship money, you need to spend 2 rand on brand building around that. And studies around the world and here in South Africa have shown that if you don't have that other advertising going on as well at the same time, your sponsorship does get largely wasted. So it is a big decision to make, but if you do it as a holistic campaign, I really think it can work. And the kinds of brands we've seen in the Sunday Times Awards this year are the very brands that are able to do that.
So parallel advertising and also sponsorship. What about new media? Neil, how does that influence brand visibility?
New media are very, very important. I think that it's changing the face of advertising. It's changing the face of how we think about getting to people. These days, it's not about talking to people, it's about having a conversation with people. And the brands that are understanding that are in the social media space. And in fact, this year, for the first time in the Sunday Times Awards, we had a social media question, which was won by Facebook, with Mixit very closely behind it. But I think one needs to have a presence in these networks, but it's got to be very carefully considered.